Brazen.
James Harper was in a dangerous position. After selling secrets to the Eastern Bloc, his partners in crime were becoming more like enemies. His contact in the Polish intelligence service, Zdzisław Cichodzin, had stiffed him on his last job. Harper had also fallen out with Bill Hugel, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur who got him at his spine in the first place. Harper's artless espionage even exposed his mistress, Louise Schuler, his source of the stolen American missile secrets. But he was desperate and broke. He needed the money. So Harper continued to press on with his scheme. By now, he and Schuler had copied as much as 100 pounds of missile documents. And those hard copies were piling up in his apartment. It was a security risk. They had to be stashed somewhere.
I was a little bit nervous about that, so I said, I gotta hide these things someplace else where I'm a little bit more comfortable about their whereabouts.
Harper had an idea. They could bury the documents somewhere remote.
When they had stiffed me on that deal before, that's when Louise and I took all that shit out to the Sacramento River Delta and buried it.
The Sacramento River Delta is the largest estuary on the West Coast. It twists and turns through over 1,000 square miles of tidal marsh and farmland. Its wetlands are meandering and vast. So vast that Harper and Schuler would need help to navigate them. So Harper called up his close buddy Jack Stouffer, who lived on the Delta, on his trimaran sailboat.
I just told him that I had these documents from Louise. I think I told him that they weren't classified. That stuff was just an accumulation of stuff that Louise brought in from her boss's office. Mm-hmm. And so I told Jack, I said, I don't believe this stuff is hot. And he was very cavalier about that. He didn't even worry about it.
Harper may have been massaging the truth for his buddy Stouffer, or offering him some form of plausible deniability. Either way, they charged ahead. Harper, Schuler, and Stouffer sailed deep into the Delta.
He took us out in the trimaran and found a place, and yeah, it was an obscure little island that put me ashore, and I went in there with a shovel and dug a big hole and hid that stuff.
Harper buried the documents, which he'd stuffed into cardboard boxes, under the Delta's mud, where nobody could find them. I once asked Harper if he could remember where in the Delta he'd buried the documents.
Oh, God, the only person that I think could ever tell you how to get there again would be Jack Stouffer.
His main stash of missile-related documents were now safely hidden. But Harper kept a copy of at least one document, a file that summarized all the classified missile documents in Schuler's boss's safe. Despite everything he and Schuler had been through, Harper still wanted to sell missile secrets to the Soviet Bloc. And he believed that this document, above all others, would pique their interest. I'm Zach Dorfman. From Project Brazen and PRX, this is Spy Valley. Episode 4, Tinkerers, Traitors, Solderers, Spies. In order to sell more secrets, Harper had to reinitiate contact with the Poles and his main handler, Cichodzin. He didn't want to call the senior Polish spy directly. What if he or Cichodzin were being watched? So he turned to another ally for help. Her name was Yuda Bushli.
I called up Yuda Bushli, who was a girlfriend that I had in Lausanne, who spoke every language you can think of.
Harper and Büchli were casual lovers. They had met in Switzerland, where she was based, when Harper's stopwatch business had brought him overseas.
I just knew that if I called her and asked her to do something, she'd do it. Pretty savvy gal. So I got a hold of her, and I had Prosujan's number in Warsaw, and I had her contact Prosujan.
Harper wasn't a particularly cautious guy, but now he was trying to shield himself a bit from his Polish spy handler, Sihojan, whose name he butchers. Anyway, Harper was using Büchli.
She was what the American agents called a cutout, somebody that you used to get information in the process, but didn't have to tell anything, didn't have to tell them what the hell they were doing.
Harper's got his spy lingo right. That's exactly the benefit of a cutout, a modicum of plausible deniability for all parties. Harper's strategy soon paid off.
When she called me back after talking to Prosujan, she said, "You better get your ass over here real quick because he wants to see you real bad." So I grabbed my shit and went back over there.
So in May 1980, Harper flew to Europe. Just like before, Sihojan greased things for Harper at Warsaw International Airport, so he wouldn't have to go through normal processing channels. After clearing customs, Harper met immediately with the senior Polish intelligence officer. Sihojan was calculatingly cold to Harper last time they had met, in Vienna. But this was a whole new Sihojan in Warsaw.
The first thing he did was hand me $15,000 in $100 bills. And he says, "Here's the money I was supposed to give you last time." She says, I didn't want to give it to you because I wanted to cut Hugel out of the action.
Remember, there was bad blood between his Polish spy handler, Sihojan, and Hugel, the Silicon Valley bigwig.
Hugel had fucked over him real good on a couple of big deals. I mean, like $500,000 stuff with semiconductor equipment and things like that.
So Sihojan gave Harper the whole $15,000. But believe it or not, Harper didn't want all the money. He was too spooked to take Hugel's cut.
I took $10,000 of it, and I gave him $5,000 back, and I says, "I'm not going to take that $5,000. I consider it Hugel's part of what we did, and if he found out that I'd taken some of his money, I don't know whether he'd kill me or what."
Harper really did fear Hugel's wrath. He told Sihojan that Hugel had connections to the Chinese mafia in San Francisco, and that Hugel, the semiconductor pioneer and ex-Democratic congressional candidate, could even have a hit placed on someone for $50,000. Sihojan, meanwhile, was undertaking a high-wire act of his own. Harper had demanded $1 million for all the missile documents in his possession. But the KGB didn't want to pay that much. So, at the meeting, Sihojan needed to lowball Harper. But the Polish intelligence officer also needed to satisfy Moscow's orders to obtain everything possible from the Silicon Valley engineer. It was a delicate balancing act, but Sihojan believed he had pulled it off.
This task was complicated by, on the one hand, the insistence of the Soviet Union on getting the materials and their request for keeping in touch with Jim, and on the other hand, the asset's exorbitant financial demands. At the outset of our conversation, we had a moral advantage of sorts. The meeting was called by him despite our poker-like play at the previous meeting, i.e. that what he gave us in Vienna was worthless. The strategy we took and the order of discussing the different elements gave us results that have surpassed our expectations.
Sihojan's colleagues in Polish intelligence looked over the documents Harper had given him, including the table of contents describing what Harper had buried in the Sacramento Delta. And they were interested, very interested. The Poles would pay, but not $1 million.
So he says, we like all of that stuff. And he says, if you go back to the United States and get that package of stuff for us, we'll give you $100,000.
For Harper, that was enough for now. So, with dollar signs in his eyes, Harper flew back to Silicon Valley. But there was one big obstacle between him and his payday. He had to find those buried documents.
So anyway, I said, shit, I got to get that stuff back.
Stouffer set sail with Harper and Schuler, following the snaking curves of the Delta. And there, on the little island, with Stouffer's sailboat bobbing nearby, Harper's heart seized up.
But this was after they'd had a big flood. That Delta had flooded over completely.
Flooding had inundated the Delta's marshy shores. Though the waters had receded somewhat, the deluge had submerged Harper's tiny island. He dug furiously through the sopping soil for the stolen missile documents.
And so all of that stuff, even though it was buried, maybe 2 or 3 feet deep, it was still water-soaked. So I grabbed all that shit. I went ashore and dug it up and brought it back on the boat.
The documents were completely waterlogged. Harper panicked. He wondered, how badly were they damaged? Could they even be salvaged?
And then Jack took us back to Louise's apartment, and I spread that shit all over her apartment, drying. And her apartment smelled like the Delta. Oh, God.
Imagine Harper and Schuler madly plastering musty, classified missile documents all over her apartment like wet laundry. It took days for everything to dry out. Lucky for Harper, when the documents did dry, they were still legible. Mostly. So he got ready for his next trip to Warsaw, his big score. He stuffed so many documents together for the Poles that there were literally suitcases of them. And in June 1980, he again set off for Poland. We'll be back after the break. We're back.
I met Procision back in Warsaw, and I took the stuff out to, I don't know, they call it a little chalet on the outskirts of Warsaw. And I'm in there in this chalet waiting to see what the hell is going on.
The chalet was surrounded by barbed wire and heavily guarded. There were lots of intelligence operatives buzzing around. But Sihojan was clearly in charge.
They had people wandering around that area. I'd look out occasionally. I'd see another car pull up or something like that. But he always had people around him, other agents.
Eventually, when things settled down a bit, Sihojan and Harper got to talking. Sihojan said his men would need to examine the documents Harper had brought.
While we're there, he takes the stuff and says, we got to take a look at it.
So Harper handed over the suitcases. The Polish intelligence officer took Harper's luggage and walked outside to a car that had been circling the property's perimeter. He handed the suitcases to a man inside. Harper watched from the chalet as the car sped away with the document stash.
So he took the stuff and he gave it to some other agents. And they started spreading it out and collating it and all that kind of shit.
When we spoke, I asked Harper whether he was nervous at the time. I mean, I certainly would be. Surrounded by communist intelligence operatives, in a safe house behind the Iron Curtain, actively committing espionage against my own country. But his answer took me back a bit.
I mean, what are you?
I'm shit-faced drunk most of the time.
Okay. There you go. There you go.
So anyway.
I don't think he was joking either. You see, while scouring the Polish intelligence file on Harper, I saw something that stopped me cold. Poems. Limericks. in Harper's handwriting, on lined paper. They don't rhyme perfectly, but you'll get the drift. Remember, Harper pronounces Sihojin's first name, Shiswaf, phonetically as Zislaw. As we sat in the forest by the fire, Zislaw and I began to conspire. The fire was hot, but ideas we had not. The only problem was to decide who was the liar. And another, logically, ideological Zislaw, told me morality in Poland was raw. The important thing was progress. So I said, I guess, I'll do whatever I can for Warsaw. And finally, as I sat in Warsaw, dealing with Zislaw, we talked of money, which had to do with my honey, and chose not to worry about the law. If these aren't smoking gun evidence and great blackmail material for the Poles, I don't know what is. So, after a period of drunken purgatory there at the chalet, Harper finally got some good news. The Poles were going to pay him in full and give him a new shopping list based on the missile docks he'd already provided. Finally, as a treasonous Soviet Bloc agent, he had some job security. Meanwhile, big things were happening behind the scenes. The KGB had flown in 20 operatives from Moscow to Warsaw to scour the 2,100 pages of Harper's documents. The KGB officers worked for nearly 24 hours straight, and they were ecstatic about what they found.
Pretty soon, a Precision comes in and says, we decided to give you $100,000 and get some other stuff for us that was indicated in that material. So I ended up with another list of stuff from them, and this envelope with $100,000. Oh, Jesus! I think, what in the hell is going on?
Before he could even think about smuggling the next round of documents into Poland, though, Harper had to figure out how to bring his $100,000 payout home.
And even though it was $100 bills, it was a pretty big package.
So Harper decamped to Switzerland to scheme for a bit. And for some R&R at a fancy hotel on Lake Geneva with his European girlfriend, Yuta Bushley. But Harper and Bushley's alcohol-fueled tryst turned sour.
So finally, I just left her. I put some money on the table in the hotel room for her, and I grabbed that money and everything else, and I headed for a casino in Geneva. And so I stayed there a while trying to figure out what the hell to do.
Frustrated and bored, Harper decided to try and deposit the funds into a French bank.
He had a bank there because of the gambling casino. So I went to the bank and I tried to deposit that $100,000 there. But they couldn't take it unless I had this document that showed where it came from and this sort of thing.
But it's not like Harper could pull out a receipt for faithful espionage services rendered. So, in true Harper style, he opted for the most brazen plan possible.
I left right there and I headed for the airport in Geneva. And while I was at the airport in Geneva, I think I went into the men's room and I strapped $50,000 $100,000. Yeah. I put half of that money in the bottom of my shoe and wrapped around my ankle on both feet. And I had it strapped to my ankles.
With $50,000 tied to each ankle and stuffed into his tennis shoes, Harper bought his ticket home to San Francisco. He flew back all the way with the money taped to him. Miraculously, he passed through customs stateside without a hiccup. Mind you, Harper made some bigoted calculations.
When I was coming through customs in New York, they had an Indian couple in the line that had about 14 suitcases. And I knew that customs agent, when he got through with them, he wasn't going to spend much time on me. So I went right on through there.
Back in San Francisco, Schuler picked Harper up at the airport. It was time to split their espionage spoils.
I sat there on Louise's dining room table and divvied up with her.
Harper gave his sailboat buddy Stouffer $20,000 for helping hide the missile documents. He and Schuler kept the other $80,000. But one person who wasn't getting paid? Bill Hugel. By that point, Harper had cut him out of the scheme entirely.
See, that all took place without Bill in it. They didn't want to deal with him. At that point in time, I just kind of had my own contact set up with them and knew how to work with them and everything, and I just avoided Bill.
Harper and Schuler, meanwhile, decided to formalize their partnership. Soon after he returned to the States, the two eloped during a booze-soaked jaunt to Reno. Was it love? Or perhaps Harper knew that married couples cannot be compelled to testify against one another. Either way, it bound the two co-conspirators more tightly together. After his big payout, Harper went back to Warsaw a few more times, but with much smaller tranches of documents than before. He was given $10,000 here and there by Sihojen. Eventually, the Poles started worrying that Harper's trips to Europe would set off alarm bells at the FBI or CIA. The Poles still wanted Harper to spy for them, just more professionally. So they instructed Harper to pretend to lose his U.S. passport and get a new one, to hide his prior travels. But he flubbed their orders. They also told him to buy a camcorder, so he could videotape the missile materials and bring a tape or two at a time to Europe instead of physically transporting massive bags of secret documents. But Harper got annoyed with the device and ignored them. So the Poles decided to switch things up.
After that first contact where they gave me that $100,000, they decided they didn't want it. They didn't want me bringing that stuff into Poland again.
Sihojen wouldn't be dealing with Harper anymore. Instead, Harper's new contact would be a Polish intelligence officer in Mexico, codenamed Jacques. But how would the two strangers know each other? Well, Sihojen had a keepsake from Harper, a laundry ticket. Harper, the dilettante poet, had written one of his trademark limericks across it.
So, Prosujan ripped up a laundry ticket and gave me half of it and said, hang on to that.
It was a neat bit of spycraft. Since Harper and his new contact Jacques had never met, at their first checkpoint, each man would show the other their half of the ripped laundry ticket. The limerick would align, and that way, the two strangers would be able to confirm the other's true identity. To assist Jacques in identifying Harper, Sihojen also instructed the Silicon Valley engineer to wear a medallion around his neck that read, Irish Brotherhood. You can't say Sihojen didn't have a sense of humor. In December 1980, Harper met with Jacques for the first time in Mexico City. He received another $10,000 the Poles owed him, but Jacques left empty-handed. This time, Harper had been too spooked to bring new documents with him. Eventually, he got his courage up and returned to Mexico City with Schuler in February 1981. With them, they brought a large stash of classified documents and received a much bigger payout. With characteristic indiscretion, Harper even chartered a private jet to take Schuler and him back home. The Poles were thrilled over Harper's new missile secrets. they were even more valuable than the materials he'd previously provided.
The obtained materials fulfill a specific order from our Soviet comrades. Soviet intelligence deems documents from the source enormously valuable. The USSR party and government leadership has been informed about the fact that Polish intelligence passed on these documents to our brothers in the Soviet service.
Harper's stolen missile secrets were strengthening the ties between Moscow and Warsaw. But Harper was becoming nervous about his trips to Mexico and cranky about all the travel. So he brought it up with Jacques.
I told him that, this place is too fucking far away. You got to set this up so I'm a little closer to home. So they said, we can't do anything in Tijuana. He says the place is crawling with American agents.
Instead, they met in Matamoros, directly across the border, where Harper was paid $50,000 for some more classified documents. And again, in Guadalajara. Then, ignoring Jacques' advice, Harper and Schuler drove to Tijuana from San Francisco, where they stashed some classified documents in a safe deposit box. Harper's paranoia was beginning to take over. He had been passing missile secrets to the Eastern Bloc for roughly 2 years. He craved the money, but feared the consequences. Sometimes, he would arrive at scheduled meetings with Jacques without documents, demanding more cash for past deliveries. The meetings turned contentious, and Harper began slowly pulling back from contact with his Polish handler in Mexico. He pushed for a meeting with Sihojan. In November 1981, Harper arrived in Warsaw. Like actors reprising their roles, Harper again sat down with the senior Polish intelligence officer. And Harper again demanded more payment for his past spying. But Harper hadn't brought any new documents with him. At this point, Sihojan's patience was wearing thin. Here's what he wrote about the meeting.
I firmly explained to him that I am not interested in this kind of cooperation either, even if just because I don't have suicidal tendencies. He knows that we pay. He received from us $250,000 in just 1 year. He knows that he never gets money if he doesn't deliver anything. Hence the question, what is going on?
It would be the last time the two men would meet face to face. Harper left Warsaw. It was the closest he'd gotten to seeing what life was really like in the Soviet Bloc. The Polish capital was then being rocked by major labor protests. For months, nationwide demonstrations, led by the Solidarity movement, had threatened one-party communist rule in Poland and Moscow's domination of Eastern Europe more broadly. Things in Poland were spinning out of control. In a bid to preempt an invasion by Moscow, the Polish regime imposed martial law on December 13th, 1981.
Poland's Solidarity Union claimed today that its workers were on strike in many mines and factories in defiance of the martial law imposed yesterday. But the extent of the stoppages could not be checked by Western newsmen, hampered by the almost total shutdown of communications.
For 16 months, the question in Washington has been, what will the United States do if the situation in Poland turns rough?
Is this the end, or only another stage for Poland's liberal revolution?
At their final meeting, Sihojan had set up another rendezvous between Harper and Jacques in Mexico. It was supposed to take place early in the new year. Harper was to deliver 29 new classified missile-related documents. It never happened. In late December, Harper received a typewritten postcard from Mexico. It read, "Dear Jim, I'm leaving for Europe for good next week. Don't hesitate to call on me being there. Best regards for Louisa. Truly yours, John." Harper knew what Jacques' coded message meant. The rendezvous was off. And without any future one scheduled, who knew when or if he'd ever meet his Polish spy handlers again? But what the Poles didn't know was that even before he'd received the coded postcard, indeed, even before he'd had that last meeting with Sihojian in Warsaw, James Harper was already scheming ahead, thinking about his next big move. He was cooking up a new plot about self-preservation from prosecution. He wanted to safeguard the hundreds of thousands of dollars he'd already received from Moscow, while also opening up a new revenue stream. Harper would offer himself as a double agent to the CIA. Born from hubris, it was a plot that would hasten Harper's own downfall. That's next on Spy Valley. Spy Valley is a production of Project Brazen in partnership with PRX. It's hosted, written, and reported by me, Zach Dorfman. Bradley Hope and Tom Wright are the executive producers. The show is produced by Goat Rodeo. To find more of Goat Rodeo's work, go to goatrodeodc.com. The lead producer is Jay Venables. Story editing from Siddhartha Mahanta, Jay Venables, and Max Johnston. Executive producers at Goat Rodeo are Megan Nadolski and Ian Enright. Creative producers at Goat Rodeo are Max Johnston, Rebecca Seidel, and Ian Enright. At Project Brazen, Lucy Woods is the producer. Georgia G. is lead researcher. Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager, and Megan Dean is programming manager. Ryan Ho is the creative director. Cover art designed by Julien Pradier. Mixing and engineering by Rebecca Seidel. Music from Goat Rodeo and Blue Dot Sessions. Editorial and production assistance at Goat Rodeo from Isabel Kirby McGowan, Kara Schillen, Jay Venables, and Megan Nadolski. Polish translation and narration by Hanna Kozlowska. Narration recorded at Outpost Studios in San Francisco. Continue to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on new episodes. And subscribe to Brazen Plus on Apple Podcasts for exclusive reporting and bonus material.